Okay, so we've got a lot of people here. It would be lovely to see a sea of faces and just get to see and hear you. And really, I'm going to be doing a little bit of talking, but hopefully all you guys are going to be doing a little bit of talking as well and weighing in on some of the data that we want to share with you that we've created and analysed over the last 20 or so years. So hugely welcome. Hello, Alex. We've got two Alexes, one male, one female. Long time no see. Hope you're well. Oh, another Alexander as well. So fantastic.
I'm sorry, I might have upgraded myself to a panelist.
No, that's good. That's
By
good. I
accident.
want to see people. So please, if you get a chance to raise yourself to a panelist, that's absolutely what I'd like you to do, because I just want to give you the opportunity to have a look at the slides and also to comment on why it might be as it might be. And just be good to know, maybe just put in the chat, are you familiar with value systems? Not values, but value systems. And if so, just is it on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being very familiar, 1 being don't really know very much, where are you with your knowledge of value systems? That would be good to get a sense of that. Cool, excellent. Keep throwing them in the chat so I can see. Thank you, Alexander. I said 1 to 5, and Bennett has 7. So that's great. Great. It's obviously a whole new level, Bennett, that we haven't yet to discover there. Bennett's gone down to 3.5. Okay, cool. Right, fantastic. So there's a number of us on screen and a number of us that aren't. So I'm going to get moving because we haven't got a huge amount of time, and I want to bring some voices into the room. So let me share, and let's get going. Oh, there we go. So 20 years of values and culture, value systems, how they've evolved, what that can tell us about business and society at large. And one of the best definitions of culture is the embodied values, beliefs, principles, and practices underlying the social fabric of a business, which permeates its actions and connects its stakeholders to each other and the company's purpose, people, and processes. So culture is as many of you will know, is a sticky topic to really dive into. But we believe that values systems are a big part of culture and a big part of what determines culture. So I'm not going to go through this in immense detail, but just for those of you who don't know too much about value systems, we take the work of Professor Claire Graves, Shalom Schwartz, and Hofstede, and we've created or built upon some of the spiral dynamics models to make that more fit for purpose within a commercial environment. So some of you, this will be a reminder. Some of you, this might be quite new, but mental model, rather than, it's not a strengths model, it's not a typology, it's not, it's not Myers-Briggs, for example, it's not personality. This is about values evolution, developmental. So as we grow, as our capacity and capabilities grow, our values change. So there's a couple of things to remember about values evolution. One of them is higher up the spiral is more sophisticated, not necessarily better. And many people have a real challenge with this one, but the ability certainly in yellow and turquoise to take a longer term picture can be quite useful, particularly in strategizing and making some key decisions in business. Transcend and include, we all start in beige at the bottom, and sort of move our way to later stages of the spiral. But what we don't do is transcend and exclude. So if we move towards blue, for example, as our center of gravity, we still transcend and include red and purple and beige. Really important that we don't lose anything, we just gain something. Pendulum swings from individual to a collective focus. So survival is individual, collective, individual, all the way to later stages. The values profile is situational. So if your situation, quite often in a business environment, your role changes. So you take on more and more pressure, you might manage more and more people. That might be a little bit more stressful. It'll take you out of your comfort zone. Actually, your values profile may well change. And last but not least, every level has an upside and a downside. It's really the downside of each of the value systems that is the catalyst to take you into, propel you into the next level. I said last one, but the model holds true regardless of scale. So whether we're talking about individuals or teams or business units or divisions, all of that will hold true for that. And so again, just to remind some of you, the upsides of beige, where people start, is we survive. The downside is there's no real progress. So in purple, to survive better, you belong, you come together. So safety and belonging becomes really, really important. And this is particularly true at times of where you're, physical violence or wars or whatever. But there's no real direction with purple. The downside of purple is that no direction. The red will say a red leader will emerge and they'll make it happen. So particularly in startups or in turnarounds of businesses, you need a leader that's going to cut through. Power is the main driver here. Clarity, simplicity, we're going over there, we're going to do this, are you with me? The downside of that is sometimes egomania, because if you're not with me, then you need to get off the bus. So we see this playing out in politics, particularly, both this side of the pond and the other side of the pond, particularly as well. And so the downside of red is actually quite a dangerous phenomenon, or can be. So blue emerges, again, particularly in a commercial environment, blue emerges and it offers us a way out of the chaos of red with a bit more stability and order. So in businesses, it might be creating a financial system or an invoicing system or a process for how we help people processes and development to happen. The downside is that when you take that to an extreme, blue can be quite inflexible, very, very rigid. So orange emerges back to the individual perspective again and says, okay, let's grow the business. Let's grow wealth and growth. The downside of that, as we saw in the 2008 financial crash, is there's quite a lot of greed and manipulation on the darker side of orange. And so largely orange is where we are located as Western businesses at the moment. But there is an emergence of green, and we've seen this certainly since the 60s, back to a more collective focus where people in caring start to take more of a front row seat. And it's more about D&I, inclusivity, social justice, sustainability, all those good things. The downside of green, or the darker side of green, can be quite judgmental, actually. And we do see some of the downsides is a kind of cancel culture, which is ironic, really, because green is really about inclusivity. But sometimes we see in these inclusive groups, you can join our group as long as you believe what we believe, otherwise we exclude you. So this green can be where inclusivity actually presents itself as exclusive. Quite a paradox there, but many people can't really see that, or people at the green value system. So that is potentially a problem for us, certainly in terms of where business is at the moment. We'll have a look at that in a moment in a bit more detail. But going into, so green and earlier, again, this is very much a guesstimate, but in terms of our database, which we know quite a lot about in terms of the data, about 90 90% of our database, so we're working with reasonably senior to medium level leaders, are 90% of them have a center of gravity at green or earlier, and then 10% in yellow and turquoise, which I'll come to in a second. In a world, in more general world population, the best guesstimates of that is about 98% of the world has a center of gravity at green or earlier. So quite a difference and quite an implication for that. So assuming one gets beyond green, yellow starts to take, green and below is very much my value system is right and yours is wrong. So it's an either or, you're either with me or not with me. Yellow is much more about both and thinking. So it's much more innovative. It can say, okay, how do we, looking at all these colors are beautiful. They're all very, very useful in certain circumstances and different situations. Actually, I might need to go into this meeting and be a bit more red or a bit more blue or a bit more green, right? So it gives a language, essentially, for how we can talk with other people, talk with our teams. So yellow is more innovative, can take more perspectives, maybe a little too conceptual on the downside. And then last but not least is turquoise, where it's much more about collective focus, systemic balance, long-term view, seeing the bigger picture, taking multiple timescales into account, maybe to allowing on the downside of turquoise. So that's quite a lot of information, but I just wanted to get that across to you. The values profile, how we do this is a simple 20-minute online profile. And basically, we use it to understand organizations. Obviously, their values, their succession, hiring right talent. We use it quite a lot for that as a great lens, a part of a total lens. It's not the total lens, but it's part of. And evolving culture, driving success. And how we connect and communicate through values, I think, is probably one of the most important. Sorry, I just clicked on there. How we connect and communicate through values is probably one of the most important things that this model is used for. So how do we better understand each other and actually communicate in the language that means the most to us? We also have a look at the commercial and personal subscale. So we're looking at strategy, we're looking at implementation, we're looking at management style within that commercial profile. And then within personal, we're looking at how I see myself today, how I see and my motivations are tomorrow, the people, the value systems we move away from and the value systems we move towards. So I talk about 10, basically there's 10 lenses there when you take the overall lens and the overall commercial and personal. So there's a lot to take in, but it really helps to give a very accurate picture. So before I launch into that, any questions? Anybody want to ask anything? No, I'm going to plow on through. Okay. So this is what we have been looking at over the last, well, it's about 18, 20 years. We have a sample size of nearly 8,000. And you can see from this how the value systems are playing out, right from 2006 to 2023. So we see this, and this is the percentage of people taking the values profile. So way back, 70% in 2006, that drops a bit, it drops. And at this point here, 2021, just very, very slightly, of course, maybe COVID related, we can have a look at that in a moment. there's a couple of moments, 2019 and 2021, when those two converge. Overall, orange and green converge. So that's quite interesting to ask, you know, why that's happening, and then they're moving apart once again. Blue has stayed relatively stable. Red is sort of slight steady decline there. Yellow has its moments going up and down, and turquoise and purple are sort of bubbling along the bottom. So just looking, this is a different lens. This is commercial overview. So this is how people how they view and make sense of strategy, implementation, and management style. So again, still that very orange, rational, metric view of the commercials, but coming down over the last 15 or so years. I'm just going to plow through these so you can just have a quick look. Sorry, no, I was going to show you that one. Let's have a look at the later three. So where this I think is really interesting is the confluence of orange, green, and yellow, because traditionally, certainly in Western business, has the predominantly been very solidly orange. So what does it mean? Why do we think this is the case? What does it mean for business? So this is, I think, quite an interesting slide as well. This is the change, just pulling out green and orange. I just want to bring a few voices in. Alex, any thoughts? Alex is a colleague of mine who works for Complete. Anything that's coming to mind here in terms of what you're seeing?
Thanks, Katie, putting me right on the spot there. But it's
exactly.
Yeah, no, love it. But I am reflecting as I look at these, and it is very thought-provoking and interesting to think, because obviously, particularly what we've seen since COVID, but very much the last few years, probably, you know, the latter part of the 20-teens as well, you know, that I think as maybe people are becoming more challenged by the complex nature of you know, of the challenges that we're facing, and probably for a couple of decades, you know, there's been a growing awareness in the corporate world actually of their responsibility as well to kind of step up and embrace them, and pressures from all sides really to kind of move towards net zero as well. So I'm wondering whether it's some of the pressures of that, and exacerbated by obviously the pandemic, that are maybe surfacing more of a leaning into disruptive energies and a need for more kind of connection and inclusivity. That's kind of what I'm wondering and curious about.
Any other thoughts? Any other?
Katie, I noticed that the sample sizes seem to have increased, if those numbers at the bottom are sample sizes.
Yeah, they are.
So that means that actually the numbers are probably actually more accurate, or more representative of the general population, which is a good thing. COVID being one inflection point certainly, I think, has made people aware that the way we're going to get out of the challenges that come to us is via collaboration. So certainly a green sort of property. I don't know what the 19 is. Brexit happened in 19, but I don't know whether that was a prompt towards getting the greens down or the oranges, greens up and the oranges down. But I can certainly believe the green has sort of remained up since 21. So that probably is a trend that's here to stay or grow, which is probably a good thing. That is my sort of takeaway from these numbers.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Let's just move on to
Alex said the other Alex had her hand up.
Yeah,
sorry.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I was just curious actually, because I know obviously that, well, the sample sizes are quite significant. I mean, do we notice any regional variations? You know, so I guess a lot of the sample will come from the US and from Europe. Do we notice any difference in the patterns across those regions?
That data, that analysis hasn't been done yet. We're actually trying in the process of writing a kind of case study and cutting and analyzing. I'm going to go into genders in a moment, which I think is pretty interesting to see the difference in some of those genders. So let's just take a look. Good point. Let's just take a look at. So the greening is driven by both men and women. So you've got the sample size and the male-female split in that for each of the years. So this is pretty interesting. Alan, what's your take on the male-female split?
Well, what's encouraging is it's both men and women. So if you look at the percentage of women whose dominant value system is green, that's definitely increased since 2006. But so has it in men, because we used to think, oh, well, this is mainly women. And also the percentage split male-female at the bottom. In the early days, it was sort of the first 5 years might be more 70-30, and now it's more sort of 55-45. So also the number of women participating. So that would have had an effect. So you think, oh, it's all the women, sort of driving. But no, the number of men whose dominant value system is green has also been increasing. It's not at the same level as women, but it's also been increasing. And also the orange has been dropping in both genders. So I think it is, to Peter's point in the Q&A, a gradual evolution of value systems in society. The greening of corporations as a reflection of the greening of society. I think that is definitely a phenomenon going on. I think it was last year more CEOs were sacked for moral reasons than for performance reasons. Whereas, and if you look at the number of books that are written about triple bottom lining and circular economics and all these types of things, there's a whole flurry of books. Even Mark Carney wrote a book about the fact that the Bank of England had probably overcooked financial value at the expense of social value. So there's a growing awareness. I don't think Bennett's point was maybe corporations getting more savvy at greenwashing, but this was asking you about what mattered to you, not what mattered to your corporation. So this was so I don't think this is corporate greenwashing. People might be slightly contaminated by that. I think there's a genuine rise in more people-centric orientations. I don't think COVID's been particularly dramatic because the trend was going up. It's not like we had a massive spike during COVID. I think people got much more aware of people issues, but I think there's a general trend over time over the last 16 years. That would be my take on it. It's a societal change. And this is global data, don't forget. This isn't just UK. This is, the last couple of years, 900 leaders all over the world in all sectors and different companies. So there seems to be a general global trend.
Any other, Peter, do you want to come on? You've worked with this quite a lot. No, maybe he's gone. Or maybe he can't talk. Anybody else? Is there anybody else who wants to bring forth a question? I think all right, no, Peter can't join right now. Okay. So it's quite interesting looking at that high point of orange almost both male and female started out, 18 years ago or whatever, super high orange. It's come down in males, but it's come down more in females. And obviously that rise of green is greater there. The yellow, that's really interesting, actually. I think just maybe just a comment on, yellow leaders. Do we, we need them in order to, cohere some better decisions, to take more perspectives on a particular viewpoint. But is there any change in terms of, we don't see an awful lot of change. We see around 10 to 15% yellow. Is that enough to elicit a change in the world when we talk about climate change being one of the biggest? The World Economic Forum has certainly put climate change as one of the biggest issues, along with cybercrime as well. Is this indicative? Is this yellow strong enough to counteract some of those real big challenges that we have? Any thoughts on that, Alan, in terms of,
you only need 10% to tip a society. But I guess it depends on which 10%. So 10% of people at the bottom of the pyramid, unlikely to tip a society, but 10% of the leaders, may tip society. But I think I wouldn't say we're on that point. I think what we can take away, there is a gradual shifting in what's important to people. How much that translates to changes in geopolitical systems, that's a much bigger and more complicated, but there is much greater awareness of, green phenomena. Whether it's going to tip society, I think, is a much bigger issue. Certainly, our experience working with corporations is that hasn't really translated through to a greater collaborative capability, which is, I personally think, is probably the single greatest obstacle to progress. Is our corporations, the people who run governments and who run society, are corporations able to collaborate beyond their own self-interest? And certainly still not yet. Despite these trend lines you can see in the gender shifts over that time frame, there's something happening, but there's still a lot more that needs to happen to cause society to shift, despite the rise of yellow in both genders, females more than males, the rise in green and the drop in orange. It's going to take more than this, but this is 3 parts of a cultural trend.
Just to add a reflection, if I may just jump in. Tomorrow is a general election in the UK, and we're sort of between 2 rounds of very significant elections in France. And I think, to your question, Katie, are these changes significant enough to kind of lead to the shift that, in some ways, our planet and the world as it is calling for us to make? And I think in some ways we can see the lack of response in the way the politicians are also kind of embracing and speaking to the population. And I think that what I've certainly noticed, particularly with a risk of being a little bit sort of like controversial, like talking about politics, but in the rhetoric that's accompanied the political messages and around this election, it's still very much speaking to quite a lot of individualism and pragmatic arguments around taxes and wealth, etc., are the ones that are most dialed up. And obviously we know that political parties are very sophisticated and tapping into those interests that matter to people. And so I think what we're seeing is a reflection of still quite a lot of dominance of orange, as well as amongst some groups, you know, a greater interest in collective inclusivity, and obviously environmental issues coming through.
Question I've got looking at this, thanks for that, Alex. Looking at this graph, is that you know, certainly looking at females in 2016, there's the crossover between, and quite a big decrease in orange over that period of time. You know, are we seeing stronger collective leadership from females in business? Are we seeing more females in higher positions in business? You know, and how does that change the cultural milieu? Because this here, 36% is 36% still orange, still coming down, and come down quite a lot with males, but still a high point of males, 22%. And yellow seems to have increased in females at a greater rate than it does in males over that period of time.
Well, it might just be the old adage that women are more enlightened than men. I just
I couldn't possibly comment about that. No?
Well, certainly in primary school, they're more mature. I mean, there are, to your point, Alex, there are 50 countries in the world going through elections in 2024, right? As we all know, the United States have got a presidential election. India had their general election between April and May. Mexico has got a presidential election and legislative election. Indonesia is in a general election. South Africa is in a general election. The European Parliament is up for election. I don't know whether we can really include the Russian presidential election in March. I'm not sure that one really counts. But 2 billion people are going to the polls in 2024. Now, again, these cultural changes are still, in my view, not enough to shift those societies. But it does give us a little hope that things are moving, and you know, we should start to see this play out in the way that people think about their legislature, the way that people think about their political policies, and perhaps more importantly, this is a corporate population, the way corporations think about their role in society. You know, back in the 1970s, you know, business was there to make money, and unashamedly, you know, would declare that. Whereas I think now we're experiencing businesses may have gone through a greenwashing, but there's certainly a commitment to, you know, many businesses talking net zero. A lot of that still is greenwashing because, of course, net zero is a promise to stop making it worse by 2050 in most cases, whereas we need to start making it better. Net positive, as it's called. Net zero won't be enough. But things are changing. So I think our question for ourselves is, in the face of this change, what do we need to do to accelerate that change and to convert these cultural changes into meaningful action on the ground in the structures of society? I think that's the real question.
Yeah. Bevan's on the call as well. I don't know if he can come on live, but he talked that we absolutely need development at high levels to integrate the systemic view needed to deal with wicked issues. But I think just as important is healthy development at lower levels, i.e. more people at scale inhabiting the healthy version of whatever level they're at, horizontal and vertical, which I think is a great point. You know, we've just pulled out, or we've highlighted 3 of the sort of, I suppose, later stages that we see quite commonly in business, particularly, and for the coaches, people that are coaching. These are 3 of the value systems you are most definitely going to see, and going to see that changing. I just wonder whether there was something, and maybe Jack, you've got a view on this. Does Gen Y have an impact in here in terms of when they sort of launched into the workforce?
Yeah, I think there's an element of truth to that. I think it's to your earlier point as well that with more women in leadership influencing the general values in leadership overall, similarly you'll see that to be the case with different generations. Each generation will have their own values set as a cluster. So I do think that's partially influencing it, but I think the real key takeaway is just women in leadership have a more likely to have a green value system. I think it's an interesting one. Alex's point really made me think about the elections, certainly in the UK, being much more kind of orange in their language. I think what's interesting to see here is that we're seeing green and yellow emerge in business, which is the next set ahead. And to Alan's point, back in the 80s, the norm in businesses was very orange. And I'd imagine that in the 80s with Margaret Thatcher, the politics was very blue. So it's almost like we're seeing two steps ahead in leadership in business as opposed to in politics. So it's interesting that there's an interplay there as well when you think about it, like on a longer term view. But I do think that it's this global trend and evolution over time that we'll see one emerge through the other.
I think there's a lag in you see the cultural shift 20, 25 years ahead of societal structure shift. So I mean, widely regarded, Thatcher and Reagan was, the sort of foundation of the orange coming out of the blue post World War II. And it really was the pinnacle, exemplified by, greed is good, Gordon Gekko, that type of thinking. Millennials since 2016 have been the largest section of the working population globally since 2016. And so they're more likely, in my experience, to have a gravity around green than baby boomers or Generation X. So that might also be having an effect. But these are senior leaders, most of these people in this database. So it's not in this data, but generally one would expect this sort of greening of corporations and society to be reflected at less senior levels because of the effects of millennials.
There's a question from Bennett here. I'd like to know how you controlled for selection bias. Values assessments may simply be more interesting to folks with more of a social focus than a profit focus.
I think it's impossible to do that, Bennett, because so there probably is selection bias in here, because this isn't a double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled trial. I mean, this is just working with organizations who are trying to improve their leadership and us encouraging them to get some proper data on their leaders. So there almost certainly is a selection bias in the people who would even be receptive to the suggestion. You probably need to understand the motivation of your people. But it's such a consistent finding, like over 16 years, there is a downward trend and it's continued. We do have pre-post data. So the database is probably about 16,000 people. If you take, some people have done it 2, 3, 4, 5 times, because your value system does change over time if you mature or if your organization or the context changes. So the bigger database is about 16,000 people. So this is just people with single tests. So if they took the test in 2007 and took it again in 2015 or 2022, we only show the most recent test that people did. But when you look at pre-post, we've seen, and we haven't analyzed the data, the entire 8,000 people who've done pre and post. Some people, if their circumstances haven't changed and they haven't grown up, are almost within 1 point of what they were 5 years ago. Other people, it's like looking at a totally different human being. So I think if we do the pre-post analysis, we'll probably find some change a little, some no change, and some change massively.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, so we've done the pre-post data on that. So Peter's question, I think, is or note really. He's talking about the data clearly showing evolution from orange to green. Therefore, as a leader, it's more important than ever to be able to integrate this perspective in order to understand and lead our people and serve our clients. Thus, of course, the need to consciously accelerate your growth and development is important if you don't want to be left behind or unable to fully understand those. So I think it does raise, you know, to Alan's point, it raises many points about how do we accelerate development if this is what we want to see in wider populations, certainly value systems that can transcend and include. And it'd be good to, you know, anybody on the call, if you are actively working with value systems or actually actively working with vertical development, you know, what's your experience? How are you seeing? Do you see clients developing, certainly vertically in terms of their perspectives, their desire to improve much more of the inner aspects of self, much more about the interpersonal as well as just the it. Anybody got any seeing anything? Alex, anything for you?
Yeah,
sorry, I
guess...
was talking about the other Alex.
Oh, sorry.
Alex, sorry.
Yeah,
we've got too many Alexes on here. I will come to you, Alex. Go on,
Yeah.
Alex Gosha.
Yeah, so anecdotally, among my clients, what I see is a mixed bit, because some of them, because of adversity, post-COVID and all of those, some have actually regressed. So some of them are sort of battening down the hatches and trying to actually be more, you know, not towards the green side. But generally, the ones who are the majority have gone forward, but at a slower rate. So my question here is that it's not necessarily a given that development happens upwards because of the sea change of adversity in some situations in the external world. So change is happening because of as a response to the change outside, and we hope that the change will go upwards along the spiral. But is it a given that that no matter what the environmental change, that the spiral will develop? Is my question. But because I've seen some regression, I've seen some advance, and as we have seen, some of them are more or less flatline. So that is what I've been seeing here.
Well, we do see values, you know, values changing depending on what circumstances people are in, and some people have found, you know, certainly post-COVID, quite very, very difficult external circumstances to be able to deal with. So yes, there is absolutely a case for many people certainly regressing in terms of their value systems. So I know that, again, that's the ability of being able to grow and develop, isn't it? That as circumstances change, as you become slightly bolder, as things evolve, actually you start to evolve. You might get yourself a new job, you might get yourself a new group of friends. All of those things are hugely important. Alexander.
I have a quick question. We mentioned that usually it takes about 10% of the population in order to shift the whole society in terms of 10% of leadership. What about the other way around? What type of percentage does it take from the masses in order to turn the leadership?
It's a really great question, Alexander. I've not ever seen any data on that, but one would imagine, you know, mass scale movements don't take much to create. I mean, you know, the thing that comes to mind is Trump's incitement of the riots to take the Senate. Often those mass scale momentums, large crowds on the street, the overthrowing of Ceausescu, grassroots flash mobs, particularly in an age of social media, it may take less to do that now than it used to. But they're usually led, the Me Too movement is usually spawned and ignited by a relatively small bunch of people. So that's, it's still, my guess is it's probably 10% there too. Who will get, 10,000 people marching, on the issue of Black Lives Matter through Cincinnati? Probably a very small bunch of people will ignite that. So I haven't seen any formal data in terms of mass grassroots activism, but my guess is the ignition of grassroots activism takes a lot fewer people than one might imagine. I don't know. What's your view, Alexander, on that?
I was thinking in the similar lines, and my idea is generally in this direction. If it takes not as many as one might think, then would this create a tension in terms of digressive pressure from on behalf of the leadership? So the masses might also be able to pull very strongly the leadership backwards. So there isn't potentially there isn't a straight line towards development in any way.
No, exactly. And in fact, we shouldn't necessarily see regression as a negative.
Yeah.
Right? Certainly through COVID, we needed to regress to survive. We needed to be less concerned about, really sort of the expansive things that we used to be obsessed by, because it was a bit of a battle for life and death through COVID. And so that was an appropriate regression. So regression's not always a negative, even at an individual level. So if many of us have got to yellow, but we forgot to pick up all the goodies at blue, it actually serves us well to retrace our steps back into the blue value system and really get back in touch with some fundamental principles that we maybe skated over. And you certainly see that in the political arena, politicians who become, masters of manipulation and gamification, but have lost touch with, their basic principles from whatever political party, might have to go back and discover those basic principles again, because if they jump too far, there is a natural, resetting. And so I've seen it written about that America and its president overreached with Obama into the yellow value system. Obama widely seen as probably coming from yellow, the only president in American history that's got healthcare reform through, for example. And of course, his successor, widely seen as a little bit of a regression compared to Obama. So sometimes, that ebb and flow that you talk about, it, is really key. Evolution is not a linear process. 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. And that's why it's important to see trends over time, not just in this data set, which is, global leaders, possibly with a selection bias. But when you look at, things like I posted in the chat here, data from the Pew Research Center and the World Economic Forum showing millennials are more strongly concerned about environment and sustainability. Deloitte's millennial survey suggests that millennials prefer working for organizations that are committed to social good. Nielsen's research on millennials, published in the Evening Standard, say that millennials are willing to pay more for products and services that come from companies committed to positive social and environmental impact. There's lots of sort of data points from lots of, so it's the sort of all of this data taken together suggests there's something going on, which is encouraging. The real question is this, this something happening fast enough to save us from some of the problems that we're brewing up, the the degradation of political systems, the degradation of educational systems and healthcare systems globally. Is this sort of societal cultural change big enough and fast enough to reverse some of those problems? Is our ability to collaborate with each other improving fast enough to deal with the increased complexity that we're creating in the world? So those are the sort of big questions that we need to lean into, I think.
There's a question from me and Trey now. What specific coaching elements have you seen that might have impacted this data over the period shown the most? For example, the understanding of emotional intelligence, the movement from fixed to growth mindset, etc., both of which have been better understood over the last 30 years.
Well, I think those, if I pick up on that, I think we've all seen that, you know. I mean, I keynoted with Daniel Goleman the very first time he came to the UK. I mean, it must be 20 plus years ago. It was the very first time he visited to promote the idea of emotional intelligence, which, as all of you probably know, it wasn't his idea, somebody else's, but he promoted it for sure. And back in those days, 20 years ago, people had barely understood the concept. And of course, now it's just commonplace. So, but understanding a concept is very different than operating with emotional intelligence. So I think there's about a 20-year lag usually between conceptual understanding in society and action. And at an individual, if you're coaching an individual's conceptual comprehension of a phenomena predates their ability to live and operate. So people will embrace yellow intellectually before they can live at yellow. People will embrace green in terms of comprehension. You know, greenwashing will precede appropriate green action. So we shouldn't necessarily see greenwashing as a negative, ironically, greenwashing is like a green shoot of actual green action. Greenwashing will always precede, actual green intervention. So, I think it's really, how do we, either at an individual coaching level or a team, divisional, organizational level, really try and accelerate this and get people to flip from intellectual comprehension, or what's often been called aboutism. I know all about growth mindset. I know all about emotional intelligence, but I haven't got any myself, to actually being able to embody a growth mindset and live with more emotional intelligence. That's the task ahead, I think.
Oh, thanks, Alan. I'm just noticing the greenwashing is faking till you make it, as Alex says. There's a quote here from which I quite like. I'm hoping he's joking. Bennett talking about, of course, my personal values are fully developed, no development necessary for him. So that's good. That's good. At least one of us is fully developed here. So thanks, guys, for that. I just wanted to just show you before we wrap up. We have created a course, Values for Leaders. There's lots of things that a number of people on this call that have done this as well. So you can do this instantaneously. It's all online. You get a values assessment for yourself. You get personalized feedback and 2 values assessments for people, whoever you want to use them with, and grading, feedback, system support, and helping you to pass. So if you're curious about that, just email katie.smith@complete-coherence.com. She will have all the information and details for you on that. So just remains for me to say thank you for joining and dialing in today. Any final thoughts anybody wants to say? Are we complete?
If I may, I really say, having built this questionnaire 16, 18 years ago, it still adds as much value in the coaching environment as it did 16 years ago. It's so much more useful in predicting the future behavior, to understand what really motivates people, what they really value, than a personality test. Every time I, help people to really get a deeper understanding of this, it really, reveals so much more and makes sense of what's going on around them, either at a global geopolitical level, at a national level, at a team level, at an individual level. It really is the gift that keeps on giving. And I think the more we have these, frameworks to make sense of the world, the more we can navigate that world skillfully, and hopefully help others navigate more skillfully. So I'd really encourage people to just, dive into the wonderful world of values. It really is unbelievably interesting, and is the gift that keeps on giving.
Great. Thanks, Alan. Thanks all for your time tonight, and hope you have a lovely evening. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.